Welcome to the Board Edit. We want to help you to lead more boldly, serve wisely, and impact deeply.
Our goal is to equip 1 million community-minded leaders to serve with confidence. I'm your host, Craig.
And I'm your host, Dawn. Let's dive in.
All right, Dawn, so what are we talking about today?
Mind the gap.
Mind the gap. Sounds like a certain UK expression. Is that what we're talking about?
Sort of. Because you could fall down
in the gap. That's right.
And get run over.
Yep.
And we don't want that.
That's correct.
Ever
That
in board
correct.
service, do we?
Yep.
Yeah, but it's really talking about sort of the gaps of what we know and what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And as humans, we all have to just accept that there are some things that we know and there are some things we're just going to have to keep learning.
Yeah.
But all of us walk into rooms with the experiences that we've had in life.
Right.
And being able to think about what's the best way that I can give sometimes means learning how to be more curious.
Sure. And so that the gap doesn't become a chasm, right? We're
Right,
trying to minimize the gap or fill in the gap. And I think as we've, talked through multiple episodes now, the recurring theme here is self-awareness, right? So you are recruited on a board because of your experiences, but that doesn't mean all of your experiences are going toward the right solution or the right problem that's trying to be solved.
Yeah. And I think that honestly is the biggest difference in our book.
Yeah.
The confident board member, because what we all see and what we all know, and I have certainly done it too, is I walk in with an assumption.
Right.
And then I get confused when my assumption is not testing well in the room because someone gets irritated or someone feels like I'm stepping on them, in some way that I didn't know or didn't mean to.
Sure.
And this is, I think, one of the key things of aligning behaviors and values.
That's right. Yep. And we have a whole chapter on it near the end of the book after we describe the Serve Smart framework. We talk about culture. And then we have these different chapters that kind of do in-depth focuses like on cognitive traps. And I think there's a ton of value because it's not something that we talk about in normal conversation, but it's a part of every conversation, just how we show up with those assumptions, what cognitive traps we fall in. So when these governance gaps exist, why do they exist and how do they manifest?
Again, I think it's just based on people's experience. And what's interesting to me and continues to confound me is that board governance is just not intuitive.
Right.
It's not innate. It's not intuitive. A lot of people that have served in business have also served on church boards and advisory boards and
civic
maybe
clubs.
Civic clubs and maybe other nonprofit boards. And you think because you've had that experience. And nonprofit governance is just different.
It is.
Yeah. And so especially in corporate world, the habits that are developed in order to meet the bottom line, not only from a tax status is a nonprofit different, but apples are not apples, oranges are not oranges. And because you have to assume that whatever the gap that the nonprofit is trying to meet, whatever the need is that's trying to be served, if it could have been met in other ways, people would have done that themselves.
Right.
So it's a very complex situation that is usually walking in the door or that the nonprofit was created to exist. And it's not something that sells in a business world.
Right. Well, and I think board members interpret like extra diligence as being part of a solution, but sometimes that can really be a distraction because they're entering with either a lot of corporate experience or these lived experiences from other similar situations, but then they're not putting on that lens of nonprofit governance. And it does change things. So people will fixate on things or they'll, really want to get in the weeds on a certain topic and, that's not even part of the conversation.
Right. Or it gets into an operational mindset versus an oversight mindset. And that's so easy to slip into where there are staff that are hired to deal more with those operational pieces. But let's talk a little bit about, because we outline this in the book, sort of these three core traps
Mhm.
of anchoring, illusion, and confirmation trap.
Yep.
Which one of those do you find, based on your experience, even just this year? Like, what are you seeing that you just notice, even for yourself,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Like a large boat, I see the anchoring trap so frequently, and it's something that is so innocuous. I think because again, you're coming to the table with these previous experiences or a meeting at work, and you might not have shifted your mindset. And a lot of times, I see this with like personnel conversations, and verbatim, the conversation happens just like this over and over where you're doing a performance review and it comes down to usually the CEO's compensation. And someone says, well, I can't support that because my company didn't give raises like that this year.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. I've way heard that. Or people don't understand the format that you're trying to give the
Right.
raise in. So then that comes down to a 6-hour personnel committee meeting.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. I've heard of those happening.
Yep. And certainly not in the last couple weeks. No.
No. Yeah, it's difficult because in a lot of times in corporate world and in business, you just make the decision.
Right.
Whereas because of the way we're audited, the way we're monitored, there are policies and procedures that have to be in place, especially depending on the funding that you
Mhm.
have. There's expectations, there's rules, and that is a Debbie Downer.
Yep.
That really is, and it is hard for a board to grasp, but
Mhm.
that's why the staff are in charge of that operational piece. But it is important that the board not fall into that trap in
Right.
order to really keep good CEOs.
Sure. And I think we see this where boards expect this to be like a bylaws thing, right? Or, well, what do the bylaws say? What do the articles of incorporation? And that's not what this is.
Mm-mm.
But there could be precedent that it is based off of. So, as a way of overcoming the anchoring trap, being mindful of it first, but then being able to replace what your thoughts are with either an evidence of a precedent or a procedure. And then how is that benchmarked? So, do we have other data to validate it? Is this based off of a comp policy that we're ensuring that we're following? And just being able to add that second layer that might conflict with your assumption, but that is a way to overcome the anchoring trap, I think, the easiest.
Yeah, and I do think, I mean, you do have to read the room,
Mhm.
right? And I think what can also happen in on boards is that sometimes people haven't been in charge. I think this is a gap, right? A
Right.
knowledge gap is they haven't been in charge of actually setting the percentage.
Mhm.
They've just been a person who carries out what an organization or a governing body has set in government or a corporate board or a CEO just decides. So that system, that context is really important,
Sure.
especially when we get into salaries. But I also think, it's those questions because this illusion trap, believing that you understand a system simply because it looks familiar. I do think this is where curiosity is really important.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times with nonprofits, of course, I go back to you're usually dealing with a human circumstance that many times you yourself have not lived through.
Right.
And the complexities of what that looks like is important.
Right.
I've had parents that have come to these community events
Mhm.
that are put on out of, I will say, the goodness of a nonprofit's heart. Right? They feel good. They're amazing. You think where they're being held is extraordinary. And sometimes the community gives you feedback that that wasn't where it was needed,
Yeah.
or because sometimes you really needed some, as we say, quote unquote, skin in the game. You wanted to charge. You
Mhm.
didn't realize how many parents or families that kept away. So there's always there always needs to be a curiosity question
Right.
because you can assume but you don't. you don't
You
know.
don't. Yeah. Well, and being able to have that curiosity to ask for context, I think allows people to not always try to apply a business application to a human condition or situation. And that happens so often because as stewards, boards immediately think of the bottom line. But as we've discussed on the podcast before, nonprofits really have two bottom lines. It's that financial performance, certainly just like any other business, but then it's this mission impact, mission delivery bottom line that you can't have one without the other. So if boards are trying to constantly apply a business application to a social issue, there are going to be conflicts with that. But if they pause and recovering from the trap say, give me context or be open to some education around it, I think it's an easy way to overcome the illusion trap.
Yeah, and I think even, a curiosity question is like with any, let's go back to, you're hosting a community social.
Mhm.
Who is the target audience?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of it? Why would we charge? Where is the event? What is within a 5 mile radius of the event? Because if you're charging an amount for entry into the event, trying to make it a fundraiser, but you're sitting between two housing complexes,
Mhm.
and that's the clientele that you're trying to serve, you're just setting yourself up. And where a board can really add value is asking those questions
Right.
and other board members being acceptive of it. That's not overstepping.
Right.
That's not overstepping. That's helping the board to think, and the staff to actually kind of think wider
Yeah.
than maybe what they would have thought in planning that event.
Yeah. Well, and one curiosity question that you say a lot that I really appreciate is what am I not asking or what don't I know to get that additional context to? And that's such a simple but powerful question because it completely erases some of those assumptions that we're walking in with. And it provides an opportunity to accept new information and to use data or have evidence that might convince or certainly change a widely held belief that you had.
Yeah, and that question, just like many, was developed because of just sort of falling on my face a few times.
That is the nonprofit way, though.
I know. But, I think the the widely changing world that we live in and being able to quote unquote read the room and the struggles that families and community members, board members, staff members sitting around the table, I think is just really important because you don't want to fall into that confirmation trap where you're just seeking the information to confirm the direction that you already have decided you want to be on.
Yep.
That would be called having an agenda.
That never happens with nonprofit boards, though.
Never, ever, ever, ever. And I would say too, as a CEO, like owning that, right? I don't want to appear that I have an agenda in this.
Right.
So I really need the board to help me with this, or I need
Mhm.
other key staff because I don't want to just line up information that's going to confirm a direction that I think we need to go on.
Yeah.
And be real clear about that. Just be open about it. I
Right.
think that helps other people actually elevate their awareness when they do it, because
Yeah.
we all do it.
Yeah. It's like that kid in class growing up that would ask the question that they already knew the answer to just to
Mm.
get a little affirmation. Sometimes I was that kid, but that's another
I was
story.
going to say, I bet that was you.
Yeah, a little bit.
I
A little
bet that
bit.
was you. Did you also? So I had the nickname of Webster,
Oh, that's
like the
good.
dictionary.
I
Yeah, I
just
may or may not have. I might have been that kid too.
Yeah. The Challenger, like my disc profile. Yep, the Challenger.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm. That's why we written the book.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I think the one word, it's a 4-letter word, and it can feel like a
I can
cuss
think of a
word.
couple of those.
Data.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Did I surprise you with
A
that?
little bit. Yeah, I thought that was
Okay.
going to be a
See,
different
never,
4-letter word.
no,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Nobody wants to think about data, and we a lot of times will get consumed by the story that we think, it's that feel good story, and we're not actually looking at the data. And I think as in particular, nonprofits, I think this is where we always have to keep reinventing ourselves anyway. It's like, is the need we were founded on or that felt like we were meeting a need 10 years ago, is that need still there? I mean,
More relevant. Yeah.
what is the data telling
Yeah,
us?
absolutely.
Because otherwise we're still stuck to the story.
Right.
And so that's called really trying to address an availability bias.
Hmm.
And again, bias, for our listeners, bias is like your blind spot,
Right.
right? And again, we all have them,
Yep.
and we have them depending on the season that we're in. It depends on our childhood, but really sort of thinking about how can we prioritize what's most present and also most representative.
Right.
And the only way you know that, again, I go back to being curious. How are
Hmm.
we surveying? How are we asking those that we're serving? How are we asking the staff that are closest to the work?
Right.
Because usually they're not in the boardroom.
Right. Right. Well, and this is where I think nonprofits, especially, create their own availability bias by their culture,
Mm,
because these narratives are so intertwined in forming the culture of how that organization was founded, how it approaches its work. I mean, I think of my organization and our founder story, and there is a time and place where we do use that. But then within the past couple years, we've had families that'll tell us, like, I don't need all that, or this is what I really need that is going to provide safety or comfort or an easier care. And that really conflicts with that narrative foundational story that we have created a culture around, just because it's something that is different than what the need is saying or what the data is saying.
hmm Yeah. And it's constantly, I guess what's coming to my mind is constantly being in a needs assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of us that are in the work, when we hear needs assessment, our eyes
Yeah.
can roll.
Cringe. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is work. But
Right.
I think if we can place ourselves always in that situation where what is the need, because otherwise we just assume.
Right. Well,
And
and
that
that
we don't want to do that.
Right. And that's such a core tenet of our Serve Smart framework, is that stewardship piece. And
Hmm
if you're going to steward resources, but you're serving a need that either doesn't exist or isn't as relevant or isn't as pervasive as it once was, like, that's just not being a good steward of those resources, both the human and the capital resources.
hmm And I think, the other bias that I think people would be surprised about, because I think it really feels good to be in a room with optimism. It does,
Yep.
especially days that can feel heavy. It feels good to like walk in a room and all we hear are mission stories,
Hmm.
and it all just kind of works out,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
that's all we hear is it just all works out,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's based on faith or luck or those types of things, and then
Yeah.
it sort of lines up where people thought there was good planning behind that.
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
And some of those things don't always exist, or
No.
budget planning, and you think your
Mhm.
next fundraiser is going to bring in 10 times what it ever has, and there's just such this energy and momentum of, oh yeah, we could raise $1 billion, and it's like, but it's only ever raised $10,000. And you have to balance that optimism with data again, planning again, and just what has history showed us as well.
Yeah, and dashboards can be helpful with that,
Sure.
right? To see trends, because until you again line up the numbers to see year over year, to look at the past 5 years, 2 years, what does it look like? And again, that can feel very labor intensive, but I will say with AI, you can
Much
generate,
easier. Yeah.
you can easily generate charts and graphics and those types of things so much differently than trying to learn it through Excel,
Right.
or one of those other platforms. I mean, there are tools now that make it a little bit easier, but it's like, is this true? Like, what is it I'm seeing? If we were to graphically depict this, what would that look like? And
Right.
ask those
Yeah.
questions if you're serving on a board.
Yeah. Well, and as boards conduct different personality assessments, and you really understand kind of who else is around the table with you, knowing that there needs to be a balance between the storyteller and the data head, that
Hmm
provides some counterchecks to these different biases and cognitive traps. You need both, and those are very valuable skills and gifts that people bring to the table. But you can't just have one type of one or the other either.
Mm-mm. And one of the things that I think contributes to these gaps, as I'm thinking about it right now, is honestly the tempo of the meetings.
Yeah. Yep.
Because out of sight is out of mind.
Right.
And if you don't meet on a good frequency
Mhm.
and don't have good written communication between meetings, or a board portal
Right.
where people can go and get the information as they need, whether they're awake at 2 a.m. or whatever it is, and they have a question in their brain and they can go to it.
Yep.
But that frequency of meeting can really create more gaps.
Right. Well, and when you're in those meetings too, what is the pace of the meeting?
Mm,
Do you have so much business that you're flying through the agenda just to get out within your hour and a half, 2 hour long meeting window? Or is it, you know, going at a pace where people like you're pulling and bringing everyone along with you, and everyone is coming to consensus at the same time and understanding where we're at and walking away knowing what decisions are being made, and just being able to slow the conversation can be such an easy yet powerful way to address some of these cognitive traps, because it allows everyone to catch up. And you might have, some vocal board members who are, faster processors than others, and
mm.
they're on agenda item 3 and you're still kind of trying to wrap up one. But just as either the CEO or, more importantly, the board chair is kind of the facilitator of those conversations, just being able to slow down, making sure that there's good understanding, and being able to move on from there.
Yeah, and I think this is where having expanded agendas
Hmm.
that not only educate but also explain what the CEO feels the decision needs to be, or what is the information that needs to be considered. Because again, if you're only meeting every other month, once a quarter, a member misses one meeting, that you just added to the gap.
Right.
There's no way not to.
Right.
And I think, being able to have realistic conversations, I'm a part of an organization right now that one of the boards meets every other month. And I think we're going to go to monthly. And
Mm.
I've been a part of lots of boards that way, just because we have to keep the information fresh depending on what it is we're trying to solve.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be unique for every organization.
Hmm.
And it's okay to test what works for your group, and what worked one year might change for the next. It depends on kind of what that board makeup is, certainly.
Yeah, and I think adding in sort of these dashboard
Hmm.
checks can help. So
Yeah.
if there is a strategic plan, if there is something that you were testing out, make sure that stays on the agenda.
Right.
Just keep it there from time to time, because it helps to keep what is the pace, what is it that we're trying to meet, especially if it's something you're already needing to report to funders or report to those that have invested in something. But I think it's important too, because it kind of helps people to think with you,
Right.
right? They're not thinking against you by
Right.
asking the
Right.
questions. They're thinking with you.
Yeah. So I do want to unpack something, just as a point of clarification. A lot of people are very familiar with the consent agenda, which was
Mm,
a big movement, I don't know, within the last 10 years or so, of just helping with meeting efficiency. But now we're seeing kind of this rise in expanded agendas, which, to what we've just discussed about addressing these biases and gaps with inquiry and feedback loops. Talk to and tell the listeners kind of what you see a consent agenda is, and how that's helpful for those meetings.
yeah, consent agendas, and
I'm
I
sorry,
think
not consent
oh,
agendas, expanded
expanded.
agendas. Yep.
Yeah, expanded agendas to me really speaks to the personalities.
Yeah.
And one, I think it's important that board members have
Mhm.
information at least 48 hours ahead of time, because everybody is busy
Yep.
that serves on a board, but it allows the board member to see in and to read it. Depending on what the subject is, I know for me, I'm a very visual person.
Hmm.
Like, I need to see it. I can't just auditorily hear it.
Right.
I need to see it and hear it sometimes. And sometimes it needs to be paint by numbers,
Yeah. Yeah. Or a
Um,
picture book. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But that expanded agenda, to me, allows transparency.
Right.
And it also helps to take your minutes,
Yeah.
for whoever is doing that. But I think board members appreciate it. I have personally used expanded agendas for over 2 decades. It allowed board meetings to go from literally 3 hours down to 90 minutes,
Yeah.
which I think is a healthy balance
Hmm.
for a good governing board. But again, people don't feel like they're being rushed to make a decision. and they know that they have the information, even if they didn't get to see it ahead of time. I do think this is where expanded agendas in board portals so
Hmm.
people can go back to them is important.
Yep.
And again, you're giving people all the information
Right.
because it's a nonprofit. We don't own it.
Right.
It's not ours. We're part of something bigger than
Yep.
ourselves.
Well, and another huge benefit I think of an expanded agenda is that it sets and manages expectations really well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been on many a board where the staff presents information and then they expect the board to come to their same conclusion without really outlining what they need to walk away with. And that's not to rubber stamp anything, but when you provide clarity and transparency with information and the staff layers on what expected action or what expected outcome they want to see out of it, it helps to guide the board knowing like where they need to dig deeper in or what areas they feel confident that the information was sufficient and to move on to. So even from a meeting efficiency point that you said earlier and literally having the meeting time, I mean, what a huge gift that is of being able to have that packet so clearly outlined that people can just move through it so much quicker. I know for my organization, we use a board portal that allows us to do that for every agenda item. It also tracks the approvals and kind of the action of those different motions, and just has made life so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't think it's, I think some people, this is not about discovery where you're inundating people with information. This is literally just honoring that different people have different levels of expertise. They have different bandwidth with time and energy, different professional backgrounds, and it allows everyone to be able to see in, to be able to come in and, if they're knowing that there's a budget issue that they think they can help with or that they have a question about, they can say, hey, could I talk with the finance person for a few minutes ahead of time? It just makes everybody feel ownership.
Yeah.
And it also makes everybody feel like they can learn.
Well, it creates equity,
Yeah,
right?
it does. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
creates an equal starting point for everyone. So regardless of where people are coming from, whether they're a client that you have served that has that lived experience or a stay-at-home spouse that might not have corporate experience but brings a lot of value and resources to the table, like it just creates an even playing field so that everyone's getting the same information, everyone understands what the expectations are, and just that equity and balance.
Yeah. Whew, this one felt deep.
Well, and I think that's too another reason why
Yeah.
like our book is so tangible, because not only is it talking about behaviors and values, but then it pairs tools like an expanded agenda that is so simple. This isn't rocket science. The work's hard enough. We don't need to make it any more complicated, but something so simple that can create such great equity across the board that is helping with efficiency. It's helping with understanding so that people can walk out of there on the same page.
Yeah, and I think this is a resource guide that we will help develop. But I will say in the meantime for listeners, simply put your agenda, especially if you build an AI. What is it that you've built even for different platforms? Like it learns your voice.
It does.
Like,
Yep.
so you can use Copilot or any of the AI tools and say, could you help me expand the language around this that a board member might have a question about?
Right.
Doesn't mean you have to use it, but at least get you thinking. And those tools of invention are readily available for everybody now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway really for listeners today is that confidence isn't certainty, it's curiosity and motion.
Well said.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Curious how your board measures up? Take our free Serve Smart board assessment at theconfidentcompanyus.com.